My name is Laura, and I'm 29 years old. My husband Tom is 28, and we've been married for 2 years. I never thought I'd be the one to destroy everything we had, but here I am, sitting alone in a cramped studio apartment that smells like old coffee and regret, trying to piece together where it all went so terribly wrong. Tom has always been different from other men I've known. He's quiet in a thoughtful way, not shy exactly, but the kind of person who listens more than he talks. His hobbies don't fit what I grew up thinking men were supposed to do. He loves baking, and I mean really loves it. He'll spend entire Saturday afternoons hunched over the kitchen counter, flour dusting his dark hair, perfecting a sourdough recipe, or experimenting with some elaborate cake that looks like it belongs in a magazine. He knits too, not just simple scarves, but intricate patterns that would make my grandmother jealous. I'd come home from running errands to find him on the couch, needles clicking softly, working on another blanket or sweater, with this intense focus that used to fascinate me. And his skincare routine. God, it's more elaborate than anything I've ever attempted. He has this whole lineup of serums and moisturizers that he uses religiously morning and night, like some kind of beautiful ritual. At first, I loved how unique he was. He wasn't like the loud, aggressive guys I dated before, the ones who dominated conversations and treated women like trophies to be won. Tom was gentle. He'd surprise me with homemade croissants on Sunday mornings, or present me with a hand-knitted scarf in my favorite color, eyes bright with pride. He made me feel cherished in ways I didn't even know I wanted. But somewhere along the way, that charm started to fade. Maybe it was because I come from such a traditional family. My dad never cooked a meal in his life. That was always Mom's job. Men were supposed to be tough, supposed to fix things and provide, and never show too much emotion. So when Tom would whip up some elaborate dessert while humming under his breath, or sit beside me knitting while I watched TV, it started to feel off, wrong somehow. I found myself wishing he'd be more manly, more like the husbands I saw in movies, or the ones my friends would brag about, men who watched sports and grilled steaks, and never worried about whether their moisturizer had SPF. The worst part is that I didn't keep these thoughts to myself. I have this group of friends, women I used to work with before I quit my job to be a stay-at-home wife. We weren't particularly close when we were colleagues, but after I left, we started hanging out more. Weekly dinners, happy hours, shopping trips. They became my lifeline, my escape from the quiet domesticity of my marriage. One night, after we'd had a few too many glasses of wine at this trendy wine bar downtown, I let slip how Tom spent his weekends. I thought it would be a funny story. You know, the quirky husband with his unusual hobbies, but it turned into something else entirely. Wait, said Jessica, nearly spitting out her Chardonnay. He knits, like, actually sits there with needles and yarn. And bakes, added Monica, her perfectly manicured eyebrows shooting up. What's next, Laura? Is he going to start doing your nails? They all burst into laughter, and I found myself laughing along, even though something twisted uncomfortably in my stomach. They dubbed him House Husband Tom that night, joking that I must wear the pants in our marriage. At first, it seemed harmless, just friends being silly, right? But those jokes didn't stay harmless. They fed into my own growing frustrations, amplifying that nagging feeling that Tom wasn't the husband I'd envisioned when I was a little girl dreaming about my wedding day. I started making little digs at him when I got home, rolling my eyes when he showed me a new recipe he'd found online, smirking when he talked excitedly about his latest knitting project, a complex cable knit sweater he was making for his nephew. I wanted him to change, to fit the stereotype I thought I deserved, and my friends, God help me, they egged me on every single time. You need to put your foot down, Monica would say during our Thursday dinners. Make him take up golf or something. Join a gym. Act like a real man. Honestly, Laura, Jessica would chime in, I don't know how you stand it. Mark would never be caught dead doing any of that domestic stuff. The irony, of course, was that Mark had left Jessica 6 months earlier for his secretary, but I didn't point that out. I just nodded and absorbed their poison, letting it seep into my marriage like slow-acting venom. Everything came crashing down at a dinner party I organized at Chez Laurent, this upscale French restaurant downtown. I knew Tom would pay. He always did, without complaint, so I invited my friends, expecting a fun evening out. Maybe I was showing off a little, proving that my quiet husband could at least provide for an expensive night on the town. Things started off fine. Tom was his usual polite self, asking about everyone's jobs and families, genuinely interested in their answers, even when they barely acknowledged his questions. But then, inevitably, the conversation turned to relationships and masculinity. My friends began with sly remarks about men in general, how they never listen, never help around the house, never show affection. But soon they zeroed in on Tom, like vultures circling prey. "So Tom," Jessica said with a saccharine smile, "Laura tells us you're quite the baker. That's so domestic of you." "I enjoy it," Tom replied simply, cutting into his steak. "There's something relaxing about working with your hands." Monica snickered. "Most men I know prefer working with their hands on cars or power tools. You know, manly things." I should have stopped them. I should have stood up for my husband, the man who loved me enough to work 60-hour weeks so I could stay home and figure out what I wanted to do with my life. Instead, I joined in. "Oh, you should see his skincare routine," I said, my voice dripping with mock affection. "He spends more time on his face than I do. Sometimes I wonder if I married a man or a beauty blogger." The table erupted in laughter, everyone except Tom. He set down his fork carefully, his jaw tight in a way I'd never seen before. For a moment, he just sat there, and I could see something shifting behind his dark eyes, something final and irreversible. Then Tom snapped. He didn't raise his voice, but somehow that made his words hit even harder, like a sledgehammer wrapped in velvet. He turned to my friends first, his voice steady and cold. "Jessica, isn't it interesting that you're making jokes about masculinity when you've been couch surfing for 3 months because you cheated on David and he kicked you out?" Jessica's face went white. "And Monica," he continued, his tone never changing, "I couldn't help but notice that designer bracelet you're wearing is from that vintage shop on 5th Street, the one that sells fake jewelry. Fitting, considering you've been telling everyone about your high-powered marketing job when you've actually been unemployed since Christmas." Monica's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "And Sarah," he said, looking at the third member of their toxic little circle, "how's that debt consolidation going? Still maxing out credit cards to keep up appearances?" The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Other diners had stopped their conversations, sensing the drama unfolding at our table. But Tom wasn't finished. He turned to me, and the disappointment in his eyes was worse than any anger could have been. "And you, Laura," he said quietly, "it's ridiculous that you'd mock me when you depend on me for everything. Financially, emotionally, everything. You brought along friends who can't even pay for their own meals, expecting me to bankroll their lavish dinners while they tear me down for sport." He stood up slowly, like an old man, though he was only 28. "You're all hypocrites," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent restaurant. "I'm not bankrolling people who think they're above me when they can't even take care of themselves." Tom pulled out his wallet, placed exactly enough cash on the table to cover his meal and tip, and walked out, just like that. No dramatic gestures, no slammed doors. He simply left, and somehow that quiet dignity made everything so much worse. I sat there frozen as the weight of his words sank in. My friends stared at me with wide eyes, like they'd just witnessed a car accident. When the server brought our check, the reality hit like a physical blow. None of them could pay. Neither could I. Tom had always handled our finances, and I had no idea our joint account was nearly empty. I'd never bothered to learn. I had to call my mother, hands shaking as I dialed, to ask her to cover the bill. Even then, my friends had to scramble to come up with their shares, suddenly very quiet about their supposed financial success. The shame was suffocating. I tried calling Tom, texting him, but he wouldn't answer. He didn't come home that night, or the next. I searched everywhere I could think of, his parents' house, his siblings' places, even his office. But no one would help me. His family had shut me out completely, and at his workplace, security actually escorted me off the premises when I refused to leave without seeing him. I was humiliated, desperate, and utterly alone. A week later, he came home, but not to reconcile. He walked into our bedroom where I was curled up in unwashed pajamas, clutching his pillow like a lifeline, and told me he wanted a divorce. I broke down completely, sobbing, begging, making promises I should have made months earlier. I offered counseling, swore I'd ditch my friends, anything to save what we had. But Tom's face remained impassive, like he was looking at a stranger. "I can't stay with someone who thinks I'm a joke," he said simply. "Someone who would humiliate me like that in public, with people I was paying to feed." He helped me pack. Even then, he was kind enough to fold my clothes carefully, called a moving truck, and sent me back to my parents' house. I cried the entire drive, finally understanding how much I'd lost. Since then, everything has fallen apart like a house of cards in a hurricane. My parents took me in at first, but they grew tired of my constant crying and self-pity. After 3 months of me moping around their house in my bathrobe, they kicked me out too. I stayed with my cousin for a while, working as a live-in nanny for barely minimum wage, but I got sick with pneumonia and lost that job. Now I'm living in this studio apartment above a Chinese restaurant, the walls so thin I can hear every order being called out downstairs. I'm jobless, nearly homeless, and scraping by on whatever odd jobs I can find. I cut off my friends after that disastrous night. I finally saw them for what they were: toxic influences who had planted poisonous ideas in my head and watered them with wine and mockery. But I can't forgive them any more than I can forgive myself. Looking back now, I see how blind I was. I had a good man who loved me unconditionally, who took care of me in ways I was too stupid and proud to appreciate. He never once complained about working long hours so I could stay home. He never made me feel guilty for not contributing financially. He just loved me, quietly and completely, in his own gentle way. And I threw it all away because he didn't fit some ridiculous mold I'd created in my head, a mold shaped by stupid movies and toxic friends and my own shallow expectations. If I could go back, I'd tell Tom I'm sorry 1,000 times. I'd tell him that his kindness was strength, not weakness, that his thoughtfulness was a gift, not a flaw, that a man who can create beauty with his hands, whether it's a perfect loaf of bread or a soft scarf made with love, is worth 100 men who think emotions are weakness and gentleness is feminine. But I know it's too late. I've lost everything: my marriage, my stability, my home, and worst of all, my self-respect. Sometimes, late at night when the restaurant downstairs finally closes and the world gets quiet, I let myself imagine what our life could have been. Maybe we'd have had kids by now, children who would have grown up seeing that love comes in many forms, that strength isn't always loud, that the best kind of man is one who isn't afraid to be gentle. Instead, I'm alone with my regrets, learning too late that the very things I mocked Tom for were the things that made him extraordinary. In a world full of men trying to prove their masculinity through aggression and dominance, I had found one who proved his through quiet acts of love and creation. And I destroyed it all because I was too foolish to recognize a treasure when it was right in front of me. The saddest part isn't even the divorce or the financial struggle or the loneliness. It's knowing that somewhere out there, Tom is probably still baking on Saturday mornings and knitting in the evenings, but he's doing it for someone who deserves his gentleness, someone who won't mistake his kindness for weakness or his creativity for inadequacy, someone who isn't me. I saw him once, about 6 months after the divorce was finalized. I was walking out of a discount grocery store with my meager haul of ramen noodles and day-old bread when I spotted him across the parking lot. He was getting out of our old Honda, his Honda now, carrying bags from the farmer's market. Even from a distance, I could see he looked good, healthier somehow, like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. A woman emerged from the passenger side, laughing at something he'd said. She was pretty in an understated way, wearing a simple sundress and no makeup, her brown hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked comfortable, natural, real in a way I'd forgotten how to be. Tom walked around to help her with the bags, and even from across the parking lot, I could see the easy affection between them. The way she touched his arm when she spoke, the way he listened with his whole body turned toward her, like her words were the most important thing in the world. That's when I saw it in his hands, a half-finished scarf in soft blue yarn, the needles tucked safely through the stitches. He'd been knitting while she drove, probably telling her about the pattern or the wool or some story about where he'd learned that particular stitch. And she was carrying a basket of what looked like fresh sourdough, the kind Tom used to make for us every Sunday morning. Only now, he was making it for someone who probably thanked him instead of taking it for granted. I ducked behind a car, my discount groceries clutched to my chest, and watched them disappear into the building. They moved together like they belonged, no awkwardness, no shame, just two people who fit. That night, I cried harder than I had since the day he left. Not out of jealousy exactly, but out of this crushing recognition of what I'd wasted. Here was proof that Tom hadn't changed. He was still the same gentle, creative, loving man I'd married. The problem had never been him. It had always been me. I think about that woman sometimes, whoever she is. I hope she tells him his scarf patterns are beautiful. I hope she brags to her friends about the elaborate birthday cake he made her, complete with hand-piped roses and layers that probably took him all day to perfect. I hope when he comes home from work, stressed and tired, she notices when he's wearing that face mask he loves and tells him how thoughtful he is to take care of himself. I hope she never, ever makes him feel like he needs to be someone else. The divorce decree came in the mail on a Tuesday. I signed it sitting on my narrow bed in this cramped apartment, surrounded by the smell of fried rice and car exhaust. 2 years of marriage reduced to legal paperwork and asset division. He kept the house. I couldn't afford it anyway. He kept the car, the furniture, everything we'd built together. I got a small settlement that barely covered my security deposit and first month's rent. But the strangest thing happened when I signed those papers. Along with the grief and regret, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: clarity. For the first time since our marriage started falling apart, I could see myself clearly, not through my friends' eyes or my parents' expectations or some magazine idea of what a wife should be. Just me. And what I saw wasn't pretty. I saw a woman who'd been so insecure about her own worth that she tried to tear down the person who loved her most. Someone who'd let other people's opinions poison her marriage because she was too weak to trust her own heart. A person who'd taken the most precious gift, unconditional love, and thrown it away because it didn't come wrapped in the package she expected. I started therapy after that. Not because I thought I could win Tom back. That ship had sailed, and honestly, he deserved better than someone who needed professional help to learn how to appreciate kindness. I started therapy because I realized I didn't even know who I was anymore. Dr. Martinez, my therapist, has helped me understand that I was never really in love with Tom. I was in love with the idea of being married, of having someone take care of me, of fitting into some predetermined script about what adult life should look like. When Tom didn't match the script, instead of questioning the script, I tried to change him. You weren't seeing Tom as a person, she told me during one of our sessions. You were seeing him as a character in your story, and when he didn't play his role the way you wanted, you got angry at him instead of examining your own expectations. She was right. I'd spent so much time trying to turn Tom into someone he wasn't that I never bothered to become someone worthy of who he actually was. I'm working now. Nothing glamorous, just part-time at a local bakery. The irony isn't lost on me. Every morning, I watch the baker create beautiful things with his hands, the same way Tom used to. I see the pride in his work, the way his face lights up when a customer compliments his croissants. I understand now what I was too blind to see before. Creation is sacred, whether it's bread or blankets, or the perfect skincare routine. There's beauty in gentleness, there's strength in tenderness, there's profound masculinity in a man who isn't afraid to nurture and create and care for himself and others. I learned all of this too late to save my marriage, but maybe not too late to save myself. Sometimes, I imagine running into Tom again someday. In my fantasy, I'm different, stronger, kinder, worthy of the forgiveness I know I don't deserve. I imagine telling him that he was perfect exactly as he was, that his quiet strength was the most beautiful thing I'd ever encountered, that losing him taught me what love actually means. But I know that conversation will never happen, and maybe that's as it should be. Some mistakes are too big to fix, some trust too broken to repair. The best I can do now is carry the lessons forward and hope that someday I might be capable of loving someone the way Tom loved me, completely, without conditions, without trying to change them into someone else. The saddest truth is that Tom didn't need to change at all. I did. And by the time I figured that out, it was far too late.